My name is Jake Morrison, and I work as a long-haul truck driver for Midwest Freight Solutions. I have been driving cross-country routes for 8 years now, and I thought I knew every rest stop, truck plaza, and roadside facility between Chicago and Los Angeles. What I discovered 3 months ago on Interstate 80 proved that some places exist outside normal maps and navigation systems. The job posting had been straightforward when I started with the company. Drive scheduled routes, maintain delivery schedules, follow Department of Transportation regulations. What it did not mention was that certain rest areas along major interstate highways operate under rules that have nothing to do with state or federal oversight. I learned about these places during what should have been a routine delivery run from Illinois to Nevada. The load was standard freight, nothing unusual about the paperwork or destination. But mechanical problems with my refrigeration unit forced me to make an unscheduled stop at mile marker 247 on Interstate 80, somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, where the landscape stretches endlessly in all directions. The rest area appeared normal from the highway. Standard layout with parking areas for cars and trucks, restroom facilities, picnic tables, and the usual state tourism information displays. But as I pulled into the truck parking section, I noticed a maintenance worker in a fluorescent vest walking toward my cab with a clipboard and an expression that suggested this was not a casual check. "Welcome to Crossroads Rest Area," he said when I rolled down my window. "I am Jerry, the facility manager. Before you proceed with your stop here, I need to explain our operational procedures." He handed me a laminated card with 7 rules printed in official-looking text. Each rule was numbered and written with the kind of precise language you see in government regulations. Rule 1. All visitors must check in with facility management before using any services. No exceptions. Rule 2. Use only the designated restroom facilities. The maintenance areas are off-limits to all unauthorized personnel. Rule 3. Do not attempt to contact anyone outside the rest area while on premises. Cell phones and CB radios will not function properly here. Rule 4. If you hear announcements over the PA system, follow all instructions immediately without question. Rule 5. Meals are available in the visitor center between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Outside food is not permitted on the premises. Rule 6. Overnight parking is allowed only in designated areas. Vehicles found in unauthorized locations will be towed. Rule 7. Departure from the facility requires checkout with management. Failure to complete checkout procedures will result in significant delays to your travel schedule. Jerry made me read each rule aloud before he would allow me to continue. These policies exist for the safety and security of all visitors. He explained in the same matter-of-fact tone used by every government official I had ever encountered. Compliance is not optional, and violations carry serious consequences. The refrigeration problem that brought me here required immediate attention, so I accepted the unusual procedures and followed Jerry to the visitor center for check-in. The building looked like standard highway department construction from the outside, but the interior was different from any rest area facility I had visited. The floors were polished concrete instead of typical institutional tile. The walls displayed maps and information about local attractions that I had never heard of despite driving through Nebraska dozens of times. Most unusual was the complete absence of windows. The entire building was lit by fluorescent fixtures that cast everything in the same flat, colorless light. Jerry led me to a counter where a woman in a state employee uniform processed my check and paperwork. She asked for my commercial driver's license, vehicle registration, and shipping manifests. Standard information for a DOT inspection, but she also requested details about my departure point, final destination, and expected travel schedule that seemed unnecessarily thorough for a rest area visit. "Your refrigeration unit will be inspected and repaired by our maintenance staff," she said after reviewing my paperwork. "Estimated completion time is 6 hours. You are authorized for overnight parking in Section C and access to all standard visitor services." She handed me a plastic badge with my name and a number printed in large text. This must be worn visibly at all times while on the premises. Replacement badges are available at the front desk for a $50 fee. I clipped the badge to my shirt and asked about getting something to eat. The woman directed me to the visitor center restaurant, which occupied a large section of the building behind a set of heavy glass doors. The dining area contained about 30 tables, most of them occupied by other travelers who looked as confused by the procedures as I felt. I ordered a sandwich and coffee from a menu that offered only basic items at prices that seemed reasonable for highway food. But as I ate, I began noticing details that made the place feel wrong in ways I could not immediately identify. The other diners were all eating identical meals regardless of what they had ordered. Everyone had the same sandwich, the same side items, the same beverages. When I asked my server about this, she explained that the kitchen prepared set meals for efficiency purposes and that individual menu selections were processed differently than I might expect. The conversations around me had a strange quality as well. People were discussing travel plans and destinations, but the details did not make geographic sense. Someone mentioned driving from Portland to Miami by way of Denver. Another table was planning a trip from Seattle to Jacksonville that would somehow pass through Phoenix. These routes were impossible given normal highway systems, but the speakers discussed them as if they were routine. After finishing my meal, I decided to explore the rest area facilities while waiting for my truck repairs. The complex was much larger than it appeared from the highway, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. I found recreation areas with games and reading materials, shower facilities that required additional check and procedures, and information displays about local history that contradicted everything I knew about Nebraska geography. The maintenance areas were clearly marked as off-limits, but I could see through chain-link fencing that they contained equipment and vehicles that looked nothing like standard highway department gear. Specialized trucks with unusual modifications, communications equipment that seemed more sophisticated than anything a rest area would need, and storage buildings that appeared to extend much further underground than surface construction would suggest. Most unsettling was the complete isolation from normal communication systems. My cell phone showed no signal despite being in an area where I typically had good coverage. My CB radio produced only static when I tried to contact other drivers. Even my GPS unit was showing location data that placed me in coordinates that did not match any mapping system I recognized. At 4 p.m., the PA system activated with an announcement that demonstrated the first real indication of how different this place was from normal rest areas. "Attention all visitors," a voice said with the flat tone of an automated system. "Weather conditions require immediate implementation of emergency procedures. All visitors must return to the visitor center and remain in designated areas until further notice." Outside, the sky was clear and calm. No indication of weather problems or any other emergency conditions. But compliance with announcements was Rule 4, so I joined a stream of other travelers walking back to the main building. Inside, the staff directed everyone to specific seating areas based on the numbers on our visitor badges. I was assigned to Section 7, which contained about 20 other people who looked as puzzled by the situation as I felt. We waited in the designated area for 2 hours without any explanation of the emergency or estimates of when normal activities would resume. During this time, I observed the other travelers more carefully and realized that many of them had been here much longer than their stories suggested. A family claimed to be passing through on vacation, but their clothes showed were patterns that indicated weeks of continuous use. A businessman said he was making a quick fuel stop, but his paperwork was stamped with dates going back several days. An elderly couple mentioned stopping for lunch, but they had clearly been sleeping in the visitor center for multiple nights. When I asked one of the staff members about the length of the emergency procedures, she explained that weather conditions in this area could be unpredictable and that visitor safety required cautious management of all activities. She could not provide specific time frames for resuming normal operations, but assured me that all necessary services would continue to be available during the delay. At 6 p.m., the PA system announced that the emergency had ended and that normal facility access was restored. But when I went to check on my truck, I found that the refrigeration repair had not been completed. Jerry explained that the parts required for my specific unit were not currently in stock and would need to be ordered from a supplier. Estimated delivery time was 24 to 48 hours. This meant I would be staying at Crossroads Rest Area much longer than planned, which would put me seriously behind schedule for my delivery. But Jerry assured me that the facility was equipped to handle extended stays and that my company would be notified of the delay through appropriate channels. I asked to use a phone to contact my dispatcher, but Jerry explained that all external communications were handled through facility management to ensure proper coordination with relevant authorities. He would file the necessary reports, and my company would receive updates on my status according to standard procedures. That night, I learned more about the reality of staying at Crossroads Rest Area. The overnight parking section was supervised by security staff who conducted regular patrols and documented the activities of all visitors. Leaving the designated parking area for any reason required permission from the front desk, and unauthorized movement around the facility was strictly prohibited. The shower facilities operated on a schedule that required advanced reservations and additional paperwork. The recreation areas were open only during specific hours, and usage was monitored by staff members who maintained detailed logs of visitor activities. Most importantly, I discovered that other travelers have been staying here for weeks or months, waiting for vehicle repairs, paperwork processing, or resolution of various administrative issues that kept them from continuing their journeys. I met a woman named Sarah who had been here for 6 weeks, waiting for parts for her transmission. A man named Bob had been here for 2 months, while facility management worked with his insurance company to resolve coverage questions about accident repairs. An entire family had been here for nearly 3 months, while their motorhome underwent extensive mechanical work that seemed to require constant modifications and additional repairs. Sarah explained the real situation while we waited in line for evening meal service. "This place does not operate like a normal rest area," she said quietly. "They find reasons to keep people here, and once you're checked in, leaving becomes complicated. The repairs always take longer than expected. The paperwork always has problems that need resolution, and the rules keep changing in ways that make departure difficult." "What kind of place is this?" I asked. "I think it is some kind of research facility disguised as a highway rest area," she replied. "They study people, document behavior, test how travelers respond to different situations. We're not customers here. We are subjects." Over the following days, I began to understand the system that kept visitors trapped at Crossroads Rest Area. The vehicle repairs were real, but they were deliberately extended through unnecessary complications and constantly changing requirements. My refrigeration unit was taken apart and reassembled multiple times as technicians claimed to discover additional problems that required correction. Parts that were supposedly ordered never arrived, or arrived with specifications that did not match the equipment, requiring new orders with longer delivery times. The paperwork process was equally designed to create delays. My shipping manifests were reviewed by multiple departments that found discrepancies requiring correction. My commercial license was flagged for verification procedures that involved contacting agencies that did not respond to inquiries. My vehicle registration was questioned due to formatting differences that required resolution through channels that operated on schedules that seemed designed to maximize processing time. Meanwhile, the facility rules became more restrictive as my stay extended. Meal times were shortened and menu options reduced. Recreation areas were closed for maintenance that never seemed to be completed. Communication with the outside world became more difficult as staff explained that various administrative procedures prevented external contact until vehicle and paperwork issues were resolved. Most disturbing was the gradual realization that some of the long-term visitors were not actually trying to leave anymore. They had adapted to the routines and restrictions of Crossroads Rest Area and seemed to have accepted permanent residence as preferable to the complications of attempting departure. Bob had stopped asking about his insurance paperwork and spent his days reading in the visitor center. The family with the motorhome had enrolled their children in educational programs offered by facility staff and were discussing employment opportunities at the rest area. Sarah still talked about leaving, but her plans had become vague and distant, more like fantasies than actual intentions. During my second week at the facility, I decided to conduct my own investigation of the place. The official story about being a highway rest area had too many inconsistencies and I needed to understand what was really happening here before I became another permanent resident. I began by carefully observing the staff routines and facility operations during different times of day. I noted which areas were accessible to visitors and which were restricted, mapped the layout of buildings and parking areas, and documented the schedules of various activities and services. I also began talking to other visitors about their experiences and the circumstances that brought them here. The patterns that emerged confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the research facility theory. Every visitor had been traveling alone or in small groups when mechanical problems or other emergencies forced them to stop here. All had experienced delays that extended their stays beyond the original problems that brought them here. And all were being subjected to various forms of observation and documentation that had nothing to do with normal rest area operations. The facility staff maintained detailed records of visitor behavior, meal preferences, sleep patterns, social interactions, and responses to different types of restrictions and rule changes. They conducted regular interviews disguised as customer satisfaction surveys that asked probing questions about personal backgrounds, travel patterns, and psychological state. Most tellingly, they seemed particularly interested in how long visitors could be kept here before they stopped trying to leave. I also discovered that the maintenance areas contained equipment and facilities that were clearly not related to highway rest area operations. Through careful observation, I identified laboratories, communication centers, and what appeared to be residential quarters for staff members who lived on site permanently. The vehicle repair services were real, but they were operated primarily as a mechanism for keeping travelers here, rather than actually fixing problems and facilitating departure. My investigation revealed that Crossroads Rest Area was indeed a research facility, one that studied the behavior of travelers under controlled conditions. The subjects were people who had been isolated from their normal support systems and gradually acclimated to accept increasingly restrictive conditions while maintaining the belief that their situation was temporary. After 3 weeks of observation and documentation, I realized that my own status was shifting from involuntary visitor toward potential permanent resident. The daily routines had become familiar and comfortable. The prospect of returning to long-haul driving seemed less appealing than staying in a place where my basic needs were met without the stress of deadlines and schedules. I was beginning to understand how other visitors had made the transition from trying to leave to accepting permanent residence. This realization motivated me to begin planning an actual escape from Crossroads Rest Area. I knew that official departure through facility management was designed to be impossible, with endless delays and complications that would keep me here indefinitely. But I also knew that the fence around the facility was not primarily designed to keep people in. It was designed to maintain the appearance of normal rest area operations while controlling access to the research activities. The Real security was psychological rather than physical. People stayed because they believed they had to, not because they were actually prisoners. I spent several days identifying the optimal route and timing for leaving without authorization. The night security patrols followed predictable patterns that created windows of opportunity for reaching the highway undetected. The fence could be bypassed at several points where drainage systems created gaps large enough for a person to squeeze through. Most importantly, my truck had been repaired to a functional state, despite claims that additional work was required before it could be safely operated. On my 22nd day at Crossroads Rest Area, I implemented my escape plan during the shift change between night and morning security staff. I gathered my personal belongings, retrieved my truck keys from the maintenance office, and reached my vehicle without being detected by facility personnel. The truck started immediately and all systems functioned normally, confirming that the supposed mechanical problems had been fabricated to justify my extended stay. I drove out of the facility at 4:30 a.m., using a route that avoided the main checkpoint where facility management controlled all official departures. As I merged back onto Interstate 80, I looked back to see Crossroads Rest Area disappearing behind me like it had never existed. Within an hour of leaving, my cell phone and GPS systems resumed normal operation. My location data showed that I was exactly where I should be according to standard highway maps, and that no rest area existed at mile marker 247. My CB radio connected with other drivers who confirmed normal traffic conditions and had no knowledge of any rest area with the name or description of the facility I had just escaped. I contacted my dispatcher to report my status and learned that my company had received no communications from Crossroads Rest Area about delays or mechanical problems. According to their records, I had been out of contact for 3 weeks without explanation, and my load had been reassigned to another driver after the first 48 hours. My truck and cargo were listed as missing, and search efforts have been initiated through law enforcement agencies. The next several hours were spent with federal authorities who debriefed me about my experience and documented my account of being held at an unauthorized facility. But when investigators attempted to locate Crossroads Rest Area using my descriptions and GPS coordinates, they found nothing except empty highway and open farmland. No buildings, no parking areas, no indication that any kind of facility had ever existed at mile marker 247. The other travelers I had met during my stay could not be located through any missing persons databases or transportation company records. Sarah, Bob, the family with the motorhome, and dozens of other people I had interacted with for weeks had no traceable identities outside of the facility where I met them. It was as if they had never existed anywhere except in that place. Federal investigators classified my case as an unexplained disappearance with safe recovery and closed the file after determining that no evidence supported the existence of the facility I described. My company reinstated me after a psychological evaluation confirmed that I was fit for duty, but I was required to undergo regular counseling to address what supervisors assumed was a stress-related breakdown that caused false memories and disorientation. I returned to long-haul driving and completed normal routes for several months without incident. But during a delivery run through Nebraska 6 months later, I found myself approaching mile marker 247 with a mixture of curiosity and dread. I wanted to confirm that the place had truly been a hallucination or breakdown rather than a real facility that somehow appeared and disappeared according to its own schedule. As I passed the location where Crossroads Rest Area had been, I saw nothing except the endless Nebraska landscape that stretched to the horizon in all directions. No buildings, no signs, no indication that anything had ever been there. But I also noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the shoulder of the highway, barely visible from the roadway, was a small maintenance vehicle with a fluorescent vested worker standing beside it. The man looked exactly like Jerry, the facility manager who had first explained the rules to me when I arrived at Crossroads Rest Area. He was watching my truck pass with an expression of patient interest, as if he was waiting for something. I did not stop to investigate further, but I contacted other drivers on my CB radio to ask if they had seen the maintenance worker or vehicle. Nobody else reported seeing anything unusual at mile marker 247. When I checked my mirrors, the worker and vehicle had disappeared. Since then, I have driven past that location dozens of times during various routes through Nebraska. Most trips reveal nothing except empty highway and farmland. But occasionally, I catch glimpses of buildings or vehicles that should not be there, visible for just moments before vanishing when I try to focus on them directly. Other drivers sometimes report seeing structures or signs that do not appear on any official maps, but these sightings are always brief and impossible to verify. I have also heard stories from other long-haul drivers about unusual rest areas and truck stops that appear along interstate highways, places with strange rules and procedures that seem designed to keep visitors longer than expected. These facilities are never in the same location twice, and they disappear when travelers try to return or when authorities attempt to investigate. But the stories are remarkably consistent in their descriptions of administrative delays, mechanical problems, and gradually increasing restrictions that transform temporary stops into extended stays. I believe that Crossroads Rest Area and similar facilities exist as part of something larger than individual research projects or isolated incidents. They represent a systematic operation that studies human behavior under controlled conditions, using travelers as unwilling subjects in experiments that test compliance, adaptation, and the psychological mechanisms that keep people trapped in situations they do not understand. The fact that these places can appear and disappear without leaving traces suggests that they operate outside normal regulatory oversight, and that their activities are coordinated through channels that have nothing to do with state or federal highway administration. The travelers who become permanent residents may be the successful subjects in these experiments, people who have been completely conditioned to accept controlled environments as preferable to independent decision-making. I now carry documentation equipment during all my trips, hoping to gather evidence that might prove the existence of these facilities to authorities who are equipped to investigate them properly. I also warn other drivers about the risks of stopping at unfamiliar rest areas, especially those that require check-in procedures or impose unusual rules on visitors. Most importantly, I have learned that some stops along our highways are not designed to help travelers continue their journeys, but rather to interrupt those journeys permanently. The rules posted at these facilities are not for safety or convenience. They are tools for controlling behavior and testing the limits of human compliance with authority. And sometimes the most dangerous thing a traveler can do is accept help from people who are too eager to provide it. My name is Jake Morrison, and I escaped from a place that should not exist, where people disappear into administrative procedures and endless delays until they forget that they ever wanted to leave. The experience taught me that not every facility along our interstate highway system is what it appears to be, and that some rules are designed to trap people rather than protect them. I continue to drive long-haul routes because the road remains the safest place for me, as long as I never stop at rest areas that require more than fuel, food, and basic facilities. The moment someone tries to hand me a laminated card with rules, I know it is time to find another place to stop. Because once you read those rules and agree to follow them, leaving becomes much more complicated than you ever imagined possible.